Okay, so end of the conference here. Almost everyone has left by now. Terrible technical difficulties. It's definitely not as easy recording things on the field than in a studio, and it's quite an interesting experience. But I do encourage everyone that is used to recording at studios to attempt at least one to record on the field. Good evening, thank you. So I had essentially two choices here. The first one, I could essentially just take public transit and I'll be at my hotel in like 15 minutes. But then I would miss on this lovely, chilly walk through the night. So why would I do that? So, in roughly an hour at most, we should arrive there. And meanwhile, I can try to practice a bit, like I said, recording on the field. So the very first, we are here right at the center of Rotterdam. So the beginning of the problem here is that I'm currently using a wired lavalier mic, and the problem that it conflicts a bit with the gimbal, because I literally have a wire running from my hand into my overcoat and exiting here near my neck. So, like I said, it's a bit convoluted, all with the tie and the suit, and it gets a bit too much. And good news now, the wind is a bit chilly, which for me is actually good, because with the current temperature, which is like 4 degrees Celsius, I may be too hot with this overcoat over the suit. So I actually welcome a bit of wind and a lower sensation. So this is pretty much the center of Rotterdam here. We are near the train station, Rotterdam Central, I think that's how it's pronounced. And Rotterdam is sometimes called like the Manhattan of the marshes or the Manhattan of the Netherlands. And it's essentially a large city, which contrasts a lot with the character of many other Dutch cities. Of course, there are smaller neighborhoods that look more like picturesque and quaint, but overall you see lots of large buildings, you see casinos, you will see more experimental architecture. And that's actually one of the things that Rotterdam became known for. It's experimental architecture. And that's because during the Second World War, the Germans bombed it so thoroughly that very few of the city was left. So that's why it doesn't have the more characteristic historic character of other Dutch cities. And in some way they use it as an opportunity to experiment a bit. So, first thing, it really rains a lot here and I need to get an umbrella. Tomorrow I should go to a bar. If you haven't seen it yet, today I was at the Medischen Pharmaceutische Museum at Delft. So I should already have this video by now if you are seeing this one. And tomorrow is the Boerhaave Museum and the Corpus Experience, I think, in Leiden. Leiden is another historic city in the Netherlands, quite known for its medical university, which is ultimately what I know most about. Of course, I am, after all, not a travel vlogger. I am at most a medical travel vlogger. No, just recording. You want to say hello? Hello? So, This is a large part of the experience, what I was saying. It's very different to record on the street compared to recording in the studio. Not only the technical aspects of it, such as the mic, but even all the interactions, positive and negative, with everyone just walking around. There's some light rail there. There's a subway station right next to my hotel, which is why tomorrow morning you probably go by subway. But not today. Like I said, enjoy a bit of the night views. So today I originally intended to start the day by going to the conference and then the DVR conference, which is, after all, ultimately the reason why I'm here. And then at around, I think, midday, no, earlier, because she was only available at 11. I was going to leave towards Delft, and then there, I was going to spend like 2 hours and come back. So this is the sort of thing you learn when traveling and recording. It's way harder than just traveling or just recording. So I had to go on a journey to the microphone to try to get the wireless microphone, and I got it, and it was mildly successful because it was not charged. So I don't even really know how well it works. I tried to charge it using my power bank, but you see, when I bought the power bank at the airport, they kind of advertised it like, and you see, it already comes pre-charged. So even though I didn't need it pre-charged, I considered that fine, it's pre-charged then. And so I didn't charge it yesterday at my hotel room. Well, turns out it was pre-charged at 30%, so it wasn't that useful. But tonight I'm going to charge the wireless mics. We're going to see if it works well. There is a small bit of Christmas decoration here, not in enormous amount, but here and there you can see some Christmas tree or something like that. And it's always kind of wet. Even though it's not rainy, it's been raining a while ago, so it's still a bit wet. And I do still hope to visit some place in Rotterdam. So, as I was saying, some advice for everyone who wants to try anything like this. First, plan good time slots, because there's things seldom take the time you expect them to take. Like, I had intended to arrive here. I had intended to arrive here yesterday and then immediately proceed to get to know the Euromast, which is one of the famous attractions here of Rotterdam. Unfortunately, first, you never know if you are going to be really tired from our travel, which is a great possibility when you take like 14 hours of plane. But second and most important, when things go wrong during normal travel, like if your phone stops working when you're just traveling for fun, it's probably going to be an annoyance, but it's unlikely to ruin your day. So you spend one day without being able to take pictures. Today, now when you are traveling and attempting to vlog, if your camera has a problem, for example, or a smartphone, it suddenly becomes a complete disaster because you urgently need to stop everything you are doing and try to fix it. Otherwise, you have no video. So always allow some time for fixing these problems that happen, because they will often happen, and unlike when you're just traveling for fun, it's way harder to just ignore it and pretend it isn't a problem. So today morning I had to go around looking for the microphone, and yesterday I was both extremely tired and I also went looking around for the microphone. Apparently Dutch people don't like microphones because right at the airport, the first electronics store I went to, they had like power banks, they had the SSG. The one thing they did not have was a microphone, especially a wireless one. And I found it really quite random store now today. So very empty. And so where was I? Beautiful street. This one is pretty decorated. Is there something beautiful to this side? I think it's darker. I think I'm going to take a shortcut through this one. It's mildly historic, like I said. It's not really Rotterdam vibe. It's more of a like Manhattan or the Maas or Manhattan of the Netherlands. But there's still some interesting alleyways. And so, besides the Maas, some of the places I hope also to show tomorrow are like the town hall and the weird queue. Okay, so the street's closed here, so let's come this way. And the weird cube house is there, and market hall, the city market hall, evidently, which are also famous landmarks. I would also like to go to travel to the mill, but tomorrow, so my plan for tomorrow is pretty different from today. Of course, I intended to work. Let's see how it goes. But early in the morning, my idea is to have breakfast and then go to the conference, stay in the conference until like to midday, and then I catch the train at Rotterdam Central to go to Leiden, where I will visit the museums I mentioned. And then afterwards, I'll come back, and if there is time, I'd very much like to visit the Maas. Now, the problem here is that it's winter, and I'm somewhat north, as most of Europe is, so there's significant difference in the duration between days and nights. And it's been getting dark really early. Sunrise is around like 8:30 a.m. and sunset is around 4:30 p.m. or 16:30. So if you want to get some daylight to actually see things, for example, from up there, it has to be during conference time. I actually wonder, has anyone ever considered holding the conference like at night? Not really at night, but like during the winter. Why not have the conference at like starting at midday to end at 9 p.m. or something like that? It's gonna be dark after 5 p.m. anyways. So, Manhattan on the marshes, it really looks the part. I made a cut because first, my cell phone wasn't gonna be able to record for an hour, and second, don't come here to hear me mumble about random things. Perhaps someday I could make a video about how to record these kinds of videos, but that's not the major point now here today. So now we are approaching Erasmus Bridge. I'll get a closer view, a better view once you get closer, but there it is. And so it's over one of the city many creeks. So I'm not sure whether the Dutch will call it that, but technically I call it a creek, one of the entrances of the sea. Rotterdam is, above all else, a very large port city. It is in fact Europe's largest port. That has due to a lot of factors. For example, it's less inland, closer to the coast than other ports nearby, such as Antwerp, for example. But it is one of the defining characteristics of Netherlands. When you think about Dutch economy, for example, you can think about high-value agricultural exports, such as tulips, let's say, but you should also think about Schiphol airport and about the Rotterdam port. Rotterdam port became one of the most important ones in Europe, largely because it has, I'm not sure I would call it a first mover advantage, but essentially, since it was already an excellent port and the Dutch are excellent shipmen and merchants, what happened is that it ended up becoming the de facto place of entrance to cargo into the European Union when it's coming, for example, from China or from countries in the East in general. So what usually happens is that here in Rotterdam we have the end of two major rivers. One is the Rhine, which drains the Ruhr Valley in Germany, and the other is, I think, Maas, which is less important than the Rhine, but also a pretty relevant one. So here's the creek I was talking about, and here the famous Erasmus Bridge. I'd also talk about who Erasmus was, if my battery permits. So, regarding the port, probably the largest industrial region in the European Union is the Ruhr Valley upstream, which is majorly located in Germany. And quite obviously you can guess that larger transatlantic ships, such as, for example, Panamax containers or post-Panamax cargo container ships, cannot travel through the Rhine. I believe that the Rhine is something like 40 meters deep. It's not enough for a very large ship. So it wouldn't make sense to transport containers up and down, for example, from cities like Cologne or Frankfurt in very large container ships. I believe it's not even possible. So all the cargo that comes to enter, and also the Rhine connects, for example, with the Danube. So, and there are also cities, for example, in the north of Switzerland that are also served by the Rhine. So whenever we need to get cargo, goods in general, to or from many of these upstream cities, what you do is that you bring the exports from the European Union here, for example, and then here at the port of Rotterdam, they get transferred into larger ships, and then they are sent, for example, to America or to Europe. Meanwhile, if it's the other way around, if they are imports coming from China, for example, then they are transferred into smaller ships here. So essentially, the short version of it is that the port of Rotterdam became the largest one in Europe because it's essentially a sorting facility. All the cargo comes here and then gets separated into smaller ships. And right now we are crossing Erasmus Bridge. And so Erasmus was a theologian, philosophist and scientist that lived, I think, something like the 16th century. And although he is originally from Rotterdam, there is some controversy there, but he is widely known as Erasmus of Rotterdam. he spent most of his life living abroad. In fact, he lived in England, he lived in the Holy Roman Empire, he lived in Switzerland, even in a lot of different places. And I really wish I had like some medical fact to associate with him, but no. Erasmus' greatest contributions were not medical ones. But since my idea here is not to make a comprehensive video about the history or geography of the city, I believe this is a good time to cut it right here under the bridge and right close to the ships, the transatlantic ships, and this new part of the city. This will be easier to see during the day, but all these buildings you see back here, right next to the ship, are because a while ago, this was, I believe, like in the 60s, this area of the city was, so to speak, more dangerous, more abandoned, so they had some problems with it, and they decided on gentrifying it. So they held many competitions to see which architecture firms could design great buildings on this region, and so it eventually became a kind of high-end region. In fact, this building right here, the block one, I think it's the G Rotterdam, is, I think, even the town hall holds offices here. They are mostly mixed-use buildings, but I believe that's the last, let's say, notable fact to share about it, and a great place to end the video right below the bridge. Hello, guten Morgen. Another day under the sun. Except there is no sun, because it's winter and raining. But you've got to do what you gotta do. So, let's go to the conference. Today I intend to show the path